Welcome, Torsten. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm so glad to have this time to speak with you.
Thank you for allowing me to.
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations on winning the honorable mention at the Beethoven Festival.
Thank you, thank you.
It was a wonderful performance, and obviously, you're the only one playing a Beethoven piece on a harpsichord.
Oh, yes, it's a quite interesting piece because it's not well, it's not specifically for the harpsichord, but it says keyboard and it's a
Yeah.
more early piece.
Where do you live,
I
Torsten?
live in Haverford, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia.
Wonderful. Where do you go to school?
I go to the Shipley School and I'm in the eighth grade, and thankfully we can go to school for at least part of the year. We're very lucky to be able to.
Do you have a favorite school subject?
I like all of my subjects in school, but I think my favorite one is French because it not only allows me to communicate with people overseas, but it also helps me maybe translate a little in a manuscript if it's not too complicated. And because there's a lot of famous harpsichord composers who were French, like Lully and Couperin, and sometimes I play from their original manuscript, and it is helpful to know what they're saying.
That's wonderful. Outside of the school, I know you probably spend a lot of time on your harpsichord, but what else do you do?
At school, outside of school, I enjoy playing tennis and squash. I also like spending time with my family. I enjoy traveling with them when that was allowed. Um, but now on the weekends, we like to watch movies together if time permits. And Otherwise, we like hiking and biking, and we like to do a lot of outside stuff.
Let's talk about your harpsichord study. When did you start?
So I started piano when I was 5, and I started harpsichord when I was 11 after years of my father requesting if that I could play harpsichord, and so finally we found a harpsichord and a harpsichord teacher, and that took quite a while. And so now I study under Dr. Anna Kislitsina at the Nelly Berman School of Music, and it's very good.
What's it like for you to play an instrument that's not very common these days?
It's fun because then I get to broaden my musical taste to stuff that's not as commonly played, and it's good. And I also then I get to say I play the harpsichord, and people will say the harpsichord, what's that? And then I get to tell them all about it.
Tell me a little bit about the differences between the piano and the harpsichord.
So the harpsichord has 3 sets of strings. It has 2 sets of 8-foot strings, so it has one set here, and it sounds, and then it has a second set, which is on the second manual, which is here. And so it sounds a bit different, and it can be played. The two can be played together to make a more electric sound or louder. And then there's a third set of strings. It's the 4-foot strings, which can be played also with the double strings, and that makes a more full sound because it's a octave higher. So, and those can also be played on their own, which is not very common, but sometimes it is used. And so I think it's so it's an octave higher, so it's very high. And then there is the lute setting. There's the strings become muted by pieces of leather, and so they sound I guess like a lute. So it sounds a bit different, and it can be used in different settings. And yes, that's the harpsichord.
How do you approach these different sounds? When do you decide that the music actually tells you when to switch?
Sometimes it does tell you when to switch the different manuals. I believe the Goldberg variations tell you when to do that. Not, I haven't played those yet, but I've heard about that. Some of the other different pieces, like the if you're playing a quicker piece, usually that's played on double strings. So if you're playing like a jig, then that's usually on double strings. But if you're playing a again like the Goldberg variations, the aria is usually played on single string because it's more of a it's not as a forceful piece. It's more lyrical, I should say.
I know harpsichord does not have dynamics.
Oh
On
yeah.
the piano that you can produce forte, piano, and all the levels in between. How do you do that on a harpsichord to show the dynamics?
So you can use the double strings to make it louder, but to those as you said, there's no dynamics, so you mostly use ornamentation to accent certain notes to make it seem louder, or you can use phrasing and different timing to make it more accented. So this is a Bach prelude, so you can play it on double strings too. So you can play that on double strings to make it louder, and then you can switch to the upper manual to make it quieter. So that'll make it quieter. Um, this one would usually be played on double strings. So at the ending chord, so it's a G major chord. You can to accent it more and create more, I guess, arrival. You would roll it, and so you can put a little trill at the end there.
How do you make it expressive?
So you would slow down certain parts and then sort of like rubato, but not as rubato-ish. So you could do so that would accent the beginning of each harmony, so that then you can use that for phrasing. Instrument that I found interesting. I like the mechanism that actually makes it different. So I'm gonna put this down here. The mechanism is a plucking mechanism that most people would. I do not think that they would think that. And so there's this little, uh, it's different materials for each harpsichord, but this I think is, I don't know, but what's interesting about it is that it plucks, and most people, because most people think of a piano, they would think that it's somehow different and like electronic or, different, or hammers. But what I find interesting is that it's actually a plucking mechanism.
And one more thing about the touch. Now you play the piano as well, then you play the harpsichord. Could you share a bit of the difference in the touch, between the two instruments?
So the technique is different between the harpsichord and the piano. So for the harpsichord, you have to be closer to the keys, or else you can sometimes hear the mechanisms hitting the wood here, and so you have to be very close to the keys, or else it'll sound not as also it won't sound as clean. But with the piano, you can spread out your hands more and do more motions and more, I guess, gestures to make also different expressiveness and expressive qualities. But with the harpsichord, you're very, I wouldn't say confined, but you have to be very close to the keys.
I used to play a little bit of harpsichord. I noticed a little delay in pressing the key. Is that true with your instrument as well?
Yes, because the little thing that plucks the string, well, it doesn't press down as easily, so you have to put a bit more force than in the piano.
Yeah. If you play as powerfully as you're on the piano keys, would you break the harpsichord?
You could break the plectra, the thing that plucks the strings, or you could break a string. Um, but and you obviously could put it out of tune very quickly. But I'm not sure if you could like break really anything else. But it's probably not so good for the harpsichord. And yeah, the tuning is quite fine, so it goes out of tune very quickly as it is. So
Do you tune it yourself?
out of tune very quickly. It's not like a piano which goes out of tune like once maybe a couple years. And so I have to. I should probably tune it every day, but I tune it like once every 2 weeks because it goes out of tune rather quickly.
How do you tune it?
There's a tuner here. I'm not sure if this is what piano tuners look like. It's a tuning hammer, and so here there's pegs. I'm not sure if you those little thingies there. And so the tuning pegs, you have to put it on here. And I do not actually have the tuner with me. We have it's on the phone, a tuner, and it's an online tuner, and it's similar to almost every other tuning instrument thing.
been the most rewarding experience for you learning the harpsichord?
I think the most rewarding experience for me has been being able to go to the Brandywine Baroque masterclass on Passeggiata Alpina, which is the music that goes across the Alps to Northern Europe from Italy. And it was taught by Catalina Vikens, who's based, harpsichordist who's based in Basel, Switzerland. And it was very special to be able to go there because the instruments at Brandywine, the area there, they're they date back to sometimes before the 1600s. So it's a huge collection of antique instruments that are like museum quality. So it was very very special for me to be able to be there. Um, and it was very. I learned on a more personal note. I learned a lot from Ms. Vikings and the other harpsichordists, the other harpsichordists who were selected, and it was very very instructive. And on a super bonus, I got to meet Professor Arthur Haas, who is a professor at the University of Stony Brook and a visiting professor at Yale, and he's done some recordings, and it was an honor to meet him.
Do you perform regularly?
Well, it is a bit more difficult because of the pandemic and all, but I have done some online performances, and before the pandemic, I did do a couple of performances, and then everything spiraled out of control. So I think if we were in a normal world, I think I would perform more or less normally. I think.
Now, in terms of the harpsichord repertoire, of course, it's a Baroque instrument. Are you limited to mostly Baroque, or do you actually have other composers who composed new music for the harpsichord?
There is actually a bit of composers who are their contemporary composers, and their music is less well known than the Baroque composers because they're newer, but they are very 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 nice pieces, and so there are some contemporary harpsichord musics.
Let's talk about the Beethoven variation that you did at the Beethoven Festival.
So first, in honor of Beethoven's 250th birthday, I wanted to play a piece of Beethoven, and I had heard that there are some pieces for the harpsichord, so I did some research, and as expected, many of them came up for the piano. But I did find one website which showed some pieces, some early Beethoven compositions that were meant for the harpsichord, and so I found the nine variations, and this research is I guess I would say prompted by my teacher Anna, and she always wants me to research this. So I researched a little bit about it, and it was actually written when Beethoven was 11, so much younger than than I was when I just learned it. So it's very impressive, and so I did some I guess analysis of the music, and it's first a very militaristic piece, I would say, as the theme would suggest. It's a march, and by each variation it gets lighter and quicker until the last variation, which is very exuberant and I guess like free, and it's very very happy. And so consequently, as I started learning the piece and I got into further variations, I had to go slower and slower because they get faster and more difficult and more virtuosic and technically challenging. And so I had to practice it much more slowly to get it very accurate because Beethoven relies on accuracy a lot of the times. And so once I got the notes down, I had to start learning more of the interpretation, which was a bit more difficult because each variation sort of has its own character. Um, so yeah, that's how I started learning it. I like to think of the composition sort of many Baroque things are pieces are based off of either story or dance. So I like to think of it as like a performance, um, as like so they had traveling musicians and performers, and I like to think of the my piece as a performance by them, and so I imagine that, and that's how I like to um, learn a piece. After, of course, I do one hand at a time and metronome and everything.
How do you deal with the difficult technical passages?
So I isolate the difficult passages first, and then I I play them one hand at a time, very, very slowly, and then I use the metronome and I speed up one, like a couple of clicks at a time. So then I will get to the speed, and then once I'm at the speed, I'll be rather proficient in the passage.
Do you find practice hard?
I mean, practicing is practicing. It is difficult at first learning, but then once I get past the notes and everything, then it becomes more. I get to delve deeper into the piece itself, which is for me actually, though it is a bit complex, it's easier for me I think because I get to be more interpretive for the piece, which I find a bit more natural than just notes.
How much are you able to practice every day?
So I try to do my schoolwork first, but I set always aside like an hour and a half at least for the weekdays, and hopefully I do more on the weekends, but at least an hour and a half.
Do you find it hard to balance school and other activities and the practice?
It is before once before I get into the groove of it, it is a bit difficult to balance it because there's different dates for each thing. Like I'll have a test, and then the day after that I'll have like a recording. So it is a bit difficult. But then once I get used to it, it's not so bad.
Do you have a good community of students learning harpsichord?
Unfortunately, around me, there's not many harpsichord students. There are some pianists who also take, well, they use the harpsichord, which is close. So I do get to associate with myself with them, which is, then I can talk to them about it and they will understand what I'm saying, which is, so that's basically the equivalent of harpsichord students for me. Unfortunately, there's not many.
What's a project you're working on?
Now I'm working on Bach and the Sons of Bach. So I think it's mostly Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, Wilhelm Friedrich, and Johann Christian Bach, along with, of course, Johann Sebastian Bach. And so I am working on that, and right now I'm focusing on a preludes and fugues by Johann Sebastian Bach, and then I'll move more into the Sons of Bach.
Do you have a favorite composer?
I like both Scarlatti and Domenico Scarlatti, the son, and Royer. He's a French composer. I like both of them. They're very virtuosic in their styles, but they can also be very slow and thoughtful. So they're very diverse in their repertoire. So I like them.
If you have a word of encouragement for the little kids, what would you say?
I would say practice. Practice as much as you can while you have the time, because that might be taken away soon. That time, and never give up. If you think that you're not playing a piece correctly, then don't give up. Don't give in to the feelings of thinking that you're not good enough. The Practicing will help, and but if you do give up on practicing, then everything will fall out of line, and then it'll be difficult to start up on that piece again. So never give up and practice.
Good message for everyone, I guess. Yeah. So you're doing well during this pandemic?
Yes, thankfully, I have my best friends with me, my brothers.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time. This has been very educational. I learned a lot about the harpsichord. All the best to you.
Thank you.